The look on my mother's face when she opened the door and saw me holding the deed to her house. I'd waited 11 years to see it, but I didn't feel the way I thought I would. Her eyes went from confusion to recognition to something I'd never seen before. Fear. My mother, the woman who had spent my entire childhood making me feel small, looked at me like I was a stranger. And maybe I was. The girl she threw away had become someone else entirely. My brother Marcus stood behind her in the hallway, frozen mid-step, a coffee mug suspended in his hand like a prop in a play that had suddenly gone off script. My father sat in his recliner, visible through the living room doorway, the television playing some game show at a volume meant for the hard of hearing. I held up the folder. Crisp, official, final. "We need to talk about the property," I said. My voice didn't shake. I'd practiced this moment for months. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning. My name is Jasmine, and I'm 32 years old now. When this story started, really started, I was 21, broke, and convinced that I was fundamentally unlovable. Because that's what happens when you grow up as the family disappointment in a family that worshipped your brother like he was a minor deity. Marcus was the golden child. I know that term gets thrown around a lot these days, but trust me when I tell you, we're talking textbook, clinical, could write a psychology paper about it levels of favoritism. If you've never experienced it, let me paint you a picture. When I was 9 years old, my brother threw a baseball through the living room window. I was in my bedroom reading. I wasn't anywhere near the yard. But when my parents rushed out to see the shattered glass, Marcus pointed at me and said, "Jasmine dared me to do it." I still remember my mother grabbing my arm so hard it left fingerprints for 3 days. I still remember my father's voice, cold and final. "You're going to pay for this window out of your allowance for the next year." Marcus was playing video games an hour later. Nobody asked me for my side of the story. Nobody cared. That was just Tuesday in my household. For my 10th birthday, my parents threw me a party. 6 kids from school, a sheet cake from the grocery store, and paper plates with some generic balloons on them. It was fine. I was grateful. Then Marcus complained that he was bored, so my mother let him open my presents before I could. "He's just excited for you," she said, as he tore through the wrapping paper on the Barbie I'd been hoping for. He handed me the box with a smirk, already missing a shoe from the doll because he'd pocketed it. For Marcus's 10th birthday? They rented out the local amusement park's party pavilion. 23 kids, a professional DJ, a 3-tier custom cake designed to look like a dragon. I asked my mother once, years later, why the difference? She laughed like I'd said something absurd. "Marcus has more friends," she said. "It's not my fault you're antisocial." I wasn't antisocial. I was just invisible. Here's the one that really sticks with me, though. The one I've replayed in therapy more times than I can count. When I was 16, I got my SAT scores back. I'd studied for months, sacrificed weekends, spent my lunch periods in the library. I scored in the 98th percentile. I came home with the letter, my hands shaking with excitement. This was it. This was the thing that would finally make them see me. My father looked at the paper, nodded once, and said, "That's good." Then he set it on the counter and went back to watching television. 2 weeks later, Marcus failed his driver's test for the 3rd time. My parents threw him a, "Don't worry, you'll get it next time," party. They bought him a cake, an actual cake, with frosting that said, "4th time's the charm," in blue script. He passed on his 5th attempt, by the way. They bought him a car. When I got my driver's license on the first try, I got a reminder to put gas in my mother's station wagon if I ever borrowed it. I'm telling you these things because I need you to understand what I was working with. I need you to feel it in your bones the way I felt it in mine. This wasn't a situation where I was being oversensitive or reading into things. This was a household where I was treated like a burden and my brother was treated like a blessing. Every single day for 18 years. I used to think it was my fault. I used to lie awake at night trying to figure out what was wrong with me. Was I too quiet? Too plain? Too much like my mother's side of the family, which she'd always resented? I bent myself into pretzels trying to earn their love, perfect grades, perfect behavior, never asking for anything. It didn't matter. The verdict had been delivered before I was old enough to understand it. The only person in my family who saw me was my grandmother. Grandma Ruth was my father's mother, and she was nothing like him. Warm where he was cold, attentive where he was dismissive. She had this huge Victorian house on the outskirts of town, the kind with a wraparound porch and too many rooms and a garden that she tended like it was her fifth child. Whenever I could escape to her place, I did. She'd teach me to bake. She'd let me read in her library for hours. She'd ask about my day and actually listen to the answer. When I told her about my SAT scores, she cried, happy tears. She said, "Jasmine, you are going to do incredible things. Don't let anyone make you small." I held on to those words like a lifeline. When I was 20, Grandma Ruth got sick, cancer, the aggressive kind. I visited her every week, even though my parents complained about me using up gas, and Marcus rolled his eyes when I mentioned her. I held her hand in the hospital. I read to her from her favorite books. I was there when she took her last breath. The funeral was a blur. Black clothes, casseroles, relatives I barely recognized offering hollow condolences. Marcus didn't even bother to wear a tie. My parents spent most of the reception talking about what would happen to the estate. The estate. That's what they called Grandma's house, like it was a transaction, not a home filled with 50 years of memories. I didn't know about the will until a week later. We all gathered in a lawyer's office, wood-paneled, stuffy, smelling of old paper and importance. Marcus slouched in his chair, checking his phone. My parents sat straight-backed, trying to look appropriately somber while their eyes glittered with anticipation. The lawyer read through the standard provisions first, some jewelry going to distant cousins, a donation to her church. And then he got to the big stuff. To my son Richard and his wife Catherine, I leave my home and all its contents, along with the remaining balance of my savings accounts, totaling approximately $1.2 million, to be held in trust for the benefit of their son Marcus. I felt the words like a physical blow. Everything. She'd left them everything, and specified Marcus, not grandchildren, not Richard's children, Marcus. My parents actually smiled, small, satisfied smiles that they tried to hide behind appropriately serious expressions. To my granddaughter Jasmine, the lawyer continued, and I leaned forward, desperately hoping there was something, anything. I leave the sum of $500, along with a personal letter to be delivered privately. $500. Not even enough to cover a semester's worth of textbooks. I don't remember the rest of the reading. I don't remember getting up or walking out. I just remember standing in the parking lot, holding a sealed envelope with my name on it, watching my family pile into their cars without a backward glance. My mother actually laughed at something my father said. Marcus was already on his phone, probably telling his buddies about his new rich kid status. I didn't open the letter until I got home, back to my cramped apartment, the one I paid for with my part-time job and student loans, the one with the radiator that clanked like a death rattle every night. Grandma's handwriting, shaky near the end, but still hers. My darling Jasmine, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you're angry. You have every right to be. The will was not my choice. It was a compromise with your father, who controlled my finances in my final years. He threatened to put me in a state facility if I didn't agree. I am so sorry. But know this, you don't need what I could give you. You've always had everything you need inside you. Leave them behind, sweetheart. Build your own life. And never, ever let them make you feel like you're not enough, because you are everything. Always, Grandma Ruth. I cried for 3 hours. Then I dried my eyes, put the letter in a fireproof safe I couldn't afford, and made a decision. I was done. I drove away that day convinced I'd never see them again. I was wrong. But the next time I saw that house, I wouldn't be a guest. Going no contact sounds simple when you say it fast. I just stopped talking to them, like it's a switch you flip, easy and clean. In reality, it's like removing a tumor. You cut it out, but the surgery leaves scars, and the recovery takes years. For the first 6 months, I flinched every time my phone rang. Conditioned response. Was it my mother calling to berate me for missing Easter? My father demanding I apologize for some imaginary slight? Marcus asking to borrow money he'd never repay? But the calls never came. They didn't bother reaching out. To them, I'd simply ceased to exist, and apparently that was fine with everyone. It should have hurt more than it did. Instead, it felt like confirmation. I'd spent 21 years trying to earn a place in a family that didn't want me, and now I had proof that my absence meant nothing to them. Devastating? Yes. But also clarifying. I wasn't fighting shadows anymore. The enemy had shown its face. My 20s were not glamorous. Let me be clear about that. I didn't have some montage moment where I went from struggling to successful with a swelling soundtrack and a wardrobe upgrade. No, I worked hard for years. I finished my degree in finance while working 30 hours a week at a call center. I took extra shifts during holidays when most people were with their families. I ate ramen and rice and beans, not because I was quirky, but because it was that or go hungry. I lived in that same cramped apartment with the clanking radiator for 4 years after graduation because I was throwing every spare dollar at my student loans. But I learned things, valuable things, about money, about how it moves, how it grows, how it can be leveraged and turned from a trickle into a stream. I discovered the world of debt investing almost by accident. I was at a conference for work, one of those networking things where everyone swaps business cards and pretends to be more successful than they are. And I ended up talking to this older guy at the hors d'oeuvres table. He managed distressed debt portfolios for a mid-sized firm. I asked him what that meant. He smiled like I'd asked him about his grandchildren. When people can't pay their debts, he explained, banks and lenders don't want to deal with the mess of collecting, so they sell the debt, sometimes for pennies on the dollar, to people like me. We're buying the right to collect what's owed. I asked him if that made him feel like a vulture. He shrugged. Everything in finance is an ecosystem. Someone's liability is always someone else's asset. The question is, who's smart enough to see the opportunity? That conversation rewired something in my brain. I started reading everything I could about debt markets, mortgage notes, business liens, tax delinquencies. I took online courses. I attended seminars. I studied case law. I became obsessed, not with the money itself, but with the architecture of it, the way financial systems created winners and losers, and how understanding the rules let you choose which side you were on. By 26, I'd paid off my student loans. By 28, I'd bought my first distressed note, a defaulted mortgage on a duplex 2 states over. I worked with a lawyer to restructure the loan with the homeowner. They kept their house. I made $15,000 on a $30,000 investment. It wasn't life-changing money, but it was proof of concept. By 30, I was managing a small portfolio of distressed debt, mostly residential. I'd left my cubicle job to do this full-time. I had an LLC, an accountant, and a business credit card. I'd met a man named David who thought my spreadsheets were sexy and my ambition was inspiring rather than threatening. We got engaged. I started therapy, finally, after a decade of avoiding it. I was building something real. But here's what nobody tells you about healing. It's not linear. You don't get better in a straight upward line. You have good months and bad months, triggers that ambush you out of nowhere. I'd be perfectly fine, living my best life, and then I'd see a grandmother hugging her granddaughter at the farmer's market, and suddenly I couldn't breathe. My therapist, Dr. Amara, was patient. She helped me understand that I wasn't broken. I was injured. And injuries heal, but they need attention. The goal isn't to stop feeling angry, she told me once. The goal is to stop letting the anger control you, to use it as fuel instead of fire. I thought about that a lot. Fuel instead of fire. I'd be lying if I said I never thought about my family. When I bought my first property outright, a little rental house that cash flowed $300 a month, I imagined, just for a second, driving past my childhood home and letting them see how far I'd come. But the fantasy always curdled. What would be the point? They wouldn't care. They'd find a way to diminish it. They'd ask for money. So I didn't preach out. And they didn't either. 11 years of silence. Then, one Tuesday morning in September, I found a familiar address on my screen. I subscribed to a service that alerts you to distressed real estate notes coming to market in specific geographic areas. It was part of my research routine. Every week, a new list would hit my inbox, properties with delinquent mortgages, tax liens, or foreclosure proceedings in progress. I'd review them, flag the promising ones, pass on the rest. That Tuesday, I was scrolling through the usual spreadsheet: loan amounts, property values, days delinquent, seller asking prices. My eyes moved automatically, scanning for outliers. And then they stopped. The address. I knew that address. It was Grandma's house. I sat there for what felt like hours but was probably 20 minutes. My coffee went cold. The cursor blinked. I read the line over and over, waiting for the words to change. The property was listed as severely delinquent, 18 months behind on a home equity loan that had been taken out by one Marcus David Richardson, my brother. He'd borrowed against the house that had been handed to him on a silver platter and hadn't made a payment in a year and a half. The outstanding balance was $280,000. The bank was selling the note for $160,000. It was considered distressed because Marcus had stopped responding to their collection attempts and a legal judgment was in process. $160,000. I had access to more than that in my investment fund. Not comfortably, it would require liquidating some positions, calling in some partnerships, but I could do it. I stared at the screen for an hour. A single thought kept repeating. I could buy it. I could own my own childhood home. I could own him. That thought scared me, the purity of it, the hunger. This wasn't the fuel Dr. Amara talked about. This was fire, raw and consuming. I closed the laptop. I went for a walk. I called David and told him I'd be working late. Then I sat in a park until the sun went down, arguing with myself. Part of me wanted to do it immediately, wire the money, sign the papers, show up on that porch and watch their world collapse the way they'd let mine collapse. But another part, the part that had spent years in therapy, the part that Dr. Amara had painstakingly reconstructed, asked harder questions. Why do you want this? Is it justice or revenge? Will owning that house actually make you feel better, or will it just wrap you tighter in their orbit? What happens after? I didn't have good answers, and that made me hesitate. 3 days later, I called Dr. Amara for an emergency session. "So you found out your brother is in financial trouble," she said, after I'd explained the situation. "And you have the ability to buy his debt." "Yes." "And you're conflicted about whether you should." "I'm terrified about whether I should, because I want to, badly, and that scares me." She nodded slowly. "What do you want to happen if you do this?" That was the question I'd been avoiding. "I want them to know," I said finally. "I want them to understand that I'm not the one who needed saving. I want them to see that everything they believed about me was wrong." "You want recognition." My voice broke. "I want them to regret. I want them to look at me and feel what I felt every day of my childhood. Small, powerless, wrong." Dr. Amara was quiet for a long moment. "That's honest," she said, "and it's understandable. But let me ask you this. If you do this, and they don't regret, if they blame you, hate you, call you a monster, will you be okay with that?" I hadn't considered that version, the one where I won and still lost, where their reaction wasn't remorse but rage. "I don't know," I admitted. "Then that's what you need to figure out first." I talked to David that night, all of it, the will, the no contact, the note for sale, the ugly knot of emotions I'd been carrying. He listened without interrupting. That's one of the things I love about him. When I finished, he said, "What do you actually want your life to look like a year from now?" I blinked. "What do you mean?" "I mean, forget the revenge angle for a second. Think about it purely as a financial decision. Does this investment make sense? Does it fit your portfolio? Would you buy this note if it belonged to a stranger?" I had to think about it. The property was valuable, worth at least $500,000 in the current market, probably more. The outstanding debt was $280,200. The note was selling for $160. If I bought it, I'd have significant leverage over a property with strong equity. Pure numbers, it was a solid deal. "Yes," I said slowly, "it's a good investment." "Okay, so make the good investment. Whatever happens with your family is a side effect, not the purpose. You're not doing this to hurt them. You're doing this because it's a smart financial move." That feels like a technicality. Maybe, but it also gives you cover. When they accuse you of revenge, and they will, you can honestly say you were just doing your job. I turned the idea over in my mind. Reframing. That's what Dr. Amara would call it. I wasn't buying my brother's debt to destroy him. I was acquiring a distressed asset with strong fundamentals that happened to involve a property I had emotional ties to. The fact that it would force a reckoning with my family was incidental, unavoidable, but not the point. Was I lying to myself? Maybe partially, but maybe that's what surviving required, finding the story you could live with. I made the call to my lawyer the next morning. The acquisition took 6 weeks. Every step of it felt surreal, like I was watching myself from outside my body. I set up a new LLC, a clean entity with no obvious ties to my name. My lawyer recommended this as standard practice for debt purchases to avoid complications during negotiation. I didn't mention my personal connection to the property, but I also didn't lie about it. He didn't ask. The bank was eager to sell. They'd already written off most of the loan's value, and their collection efforts had hit a wall. Marcus, apparently, had stopped responding to certified letters, had dodged process servers, and had let the property fall into the foreclosure pipeline. The bank just wanted their money back, any money. They accepted my offer with minimal negotiation. The wire transfer went through on a Thursday afternoon. $162,000. Every cent I'd earned honestly, channeled into this singular moment. I received the documents by overnight courier on Friday, the original promissory note, the deed of trust, and the assignment paperwork making my LLC the legal note holder. I was, officially, the creditor for the family estate. If Marcus didn't pay, I had the right to foreclose. If he didn't vacate, I had the right to evict. I sat with those papers in my hands for a long time. They felt heavier than paper should. The documents were signed, the wire transfer was confirmed, and just like that, for the price of their outstanding debt, I legally owned the family that had disowned me. Now came the hard part: what to do with them. I didn't act immediately. There was no rush. The debt wasn't going anywhere, and neither was the house. I had time to think, to plan, to decide exactly how I wanted this to unfold. My lawyer sent the formal notice out 2 weeks after the acquisition was complete. It was standard language, a new creditor notification, a demand for payment or restructuring, a warning about the consequences of continued default. My name appeared nowhere, only the LLC. I hired a discreet investigator to keep me informed about the family's response. I told myself this was standard due diligence on a distressed asset. I almost believed it. The panic set in immediately. The investigator reported that Marcus had called 4 different lawyers within the first week. None of them would take his case on contingency, and he apparently couldn't afford their retainers. He'd made at least 6 visits to local banks seeking refinancing, but his credit score, damaged by the 18 months of missed payments, made him untouchable. He'd even tried to list the property for sale, but the legal encumbrances made a clean sale impossible without paying off the note first. He didn't have $280,000. Based on what I could determine, he didn't have $28,000. My brother, the golden child, who'd been handed everything, had managed to lose it all through sheer incompetence. The investigator learned he'd used the home equity loan to invest in a cryptocurrency scheme that collapsed. A friend's can't-miss opportunity. He hadn't even diversified, just threw $250,000 at something he didn't understand because he thought he was too special to lose. Some lessons you can't teach, you just have to watch. My parents got involved next. Their funds were limited: Social Security, a modest pension from my father's old job, some savings, but they tried. My mother apparently called the LLC's registered agent, crying, begging for an extension. She was told to work with an attorney to submit a formal restructuring proposal. They didn't submit anything. They didn't have the resources to hire someone competent, and they were too proud to seek help. 3 months after the initial notice, we sent a follow-up, a foreclosure warning. Pay within 30 days or we begin legal proceedings. That's when I decided it was time. I didn't announce myself in advance. I just showed up. October afternoon, the kind where the leaves are turning and the air smells like wood smoke and memory. I parked at the bottom of the long driveway, Grandma's driveway, and walked up the gravel path I'd walked 100 times as a child. The house looked smaller than I remembered, shabbier. The wraparound porch needed painting. The garden was overgrown. Grandma would have wept. I knocked on the door. My mother answered. The moment stretched between us, infinite and silent. I watched recognition dawn. First confusion. Do I know you? Then the pieces clicking together. The shape of my face. My grandmother's eyes looking out from my head. Jasmine? Hello, Mother. Marcus appeared behind her, drawn by curiosity. Then my father, slower, using a cane now. They formed a tableau in the doorway, and I stood on the porch with my folder of documents, and nobody moved. What are you doing here? My mother's voice had an edge, defensive, almost afraid. We need to talk about the property. The property? What does that? She stopped. Her eyes went to the folder. I saw the moment she understood. The color drained from her face. You, she whispered. It's you. I didn't respond. I just stood there, calm, waiting. Marcus pushed forward. What the hell is going on? You know something about this loan company? What is? There is no loan company, my father said. He'd always been the sharpest one. She bought the note, didn't you, Jasmine? 3 months ago, yes. Silence. The wind rustled the dead leaves on the porch. Then my mother started screaming. Not words at first, just sound, raw and animal. It devolved into accusations, insults, the kind of language she'd never used in front of her precious son. I was ungrateful. I was vindictive. I was a monster. I had no right. I was no daughter of hers. You were very clear about that last part, I said when she paused for breath. That's why the inheritance skipped me, remember? You can't do this, she screamed. We're your family. I looked her in the eye for the first time in 11 years. You made it very clear I wasn't. Marcus found his voice. Blustery, defensive. The golden child refusing to believe his halo had slipped. This is insane. You can't just buy someone's debt. That's not how it works. I'm going to sue you. You're welcome to try. But I should mention that I've already consulted with 3 attorneys, and they've confirmed that my purchase was completely legal. I own the note. You owe me $280,000 plus accumulated interest. You have, I checked my watch, 27 days to pay in full, restructure with my approval, or vacate the property before foreclosure proceedings begin. He stared at me like I was speaking a foreign language. My father said nothing. He just watched me with an expression I couldn't read. Not anger exactly, not regret, something colder, calculation maybe. He was trying to figure out his next move. I didn't come here to evict you today, I said. I came to explain your options. Options, my mother spat. What options? I laid them out, calmly, professionally, the way I would for any debtor. Option 1, pay the full amount owed. I assumed this wasn't possible, but I was legally obligated to offer it. Option 2, agree to a restructured payment plan that would allow continued occupancy while paying down the debt over time. Terms to be negotiated. Interest would continue to accrue. Option 3, deed in lieu of foreclosure. Surrender the property voluntarily, avoid the credit hit of a formal foreclosure, and receive a modest relocation stipend. I'd take possession, and they'd walk away with their dignity mostly intact. Option 4, contest the debt in court. Expensive, lengthy, and almost certainly futile, but they're right. Or, I added, you can do nothing, let the foreclosure proceed, and be removed by the sheriff in about 90 days. Marcus exploded, shouting, cursing, threatening, the same tantrum he'd thrown as a child whenever he didn't get his way. My mother joined in. It was chaos. Through it all, my father stayed silent, just watching. Finally, he raised his hand. My mother and brother fell quiet. Old habits, I suppose. What do you actually want, Jasmine? I'd prepared for this question. I want the house that should have been mine. I want the property that Grandma Ruth intended for me before you coerced her into changing her will. I want what I'm legally entitled to as the note holder. I paused. What I don't want is to put elderly people on the street. I'm not a monster, despite what Mother thinks. Then what are you proposing? I opened the folder, pulled out a document I'd drafted with my lawyer. Marcus signs the deed over to my LLC immediately. In exchange, I forgive the outstanding debt. He's free and clear, credit damaged but not destroyed. He can go wherever he wants, start over. I don't care. Marcus started to protest, but my father silenced him with a look. And us? You and Mother can stay in the guest cottage for as long as you're able to live independently. You'll pay $1 per month in rent, symbolic, legally necessary, but not a burden. When you're no longer able to care for yourselves, we'll discuss other arrangements. Fair?" My mother's jaw actually dropped. She'd clearly been expecting something crueler. "Why?" she asked. "After what we did to you, why would you—" "Because I'm not you," I said. "I don't throw family away because they're inconvenient. But I'm also not a doormat anymore. This property is mine now. You're here by my grace. That's the truth of it." The silence stretched. Nobody knew what to say. Marcus broke first. "I'm not signing anything. You can't make me sign anything. I'll find a lawyer. Then you'll find yourself in foreclosure, and you'll lose everything anyway. Your choice." I left the documents on the porch railing, walked back down the driveway without looking back. "My lawyer will be in touch," I called over my shoulder. "You have 1 week to decide." It took them 3 days. The papers came back signed. Marcus's signature was shaky, angry, pressed so hard into the paper it nearly tore through. But it was legal. The deed transferred. I owned the house. The weeks that followed were strange. I didn't move in immediately. I wasn't ready for that, and practically speaking, there was work to be done. The property had suffered years of neglect under Marcus's stewardship. I hired contractors, started repairs, reclaimed what had been abandoned. Family dynamics fractured along predictable lines. Extended relatives I hadn't spoken to in a decade suddenly came out of the woodwork. Some to express outrage on my parents' behalf. How dare I treat my own family this way? Others reached out quietly, privately, to say they'd always known something was wrong, that they'd seen how I was treated, that they were proud of me. An aunt from my mother's side sent me a letter, handwritten. "I noticed what was happening when you were a child," she wrote. "I mentioned it once to your mother and was told to mind my own business. I should have said more, done more. I'm sorry I didn't." That letter meant more to me than she probably knew. Marcus left town within 2 months. Couldn't stand to see me succeed, I suppose. Last I heard, he was in another state, working at a car dealership. Not exactly the golden future my parents had envisioned for their perfect son. I didn't gloat. There was no satisfaction in his failure, not really. Just a kind of tired acknowledgement that we all end up where we put ourselves. My parents stayed in the guest cottage. True to my word, I didn't evict them. We weren't close, we never would be, but there was a kind of détente. They stayed out of my way. I handled the property. Occasionally, our paths crossed. My mother never apologized. I never expected her to. But once, about 6 months after the transfer, I found her standing in Grandma's garden, the one I'd had restored. She was looking at the roses, touching them gently, like she was remembering something. I walked up beside her. We stood in silence. "She loved this garden," my mother said finally, not looking at me. "I know. She used to talk about you, all the time. How smart you were, how determined." I didn't respond. This was the closest thing to an acknowledgement I was ever going to get. "I should have listened to her," my mother said. Then she walked away. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't reconciliation. But it was something. A crack in the armor. I didn't need more than that. My father spoke to me only once more before he passed away last spring. Heart attack. Quick. Probably a mercy given his declining health. He'd called me to the cottage, asked me to sit. He looked old in a way that had nothing to do with years, defeated somehow, emptied out. "I've thought about it a lot," he said. "Why we did what we did. With you, with Marcus." I waited. "I think we were afraid of you," he said. "That sounds absurd, being afraid of a child. But you were so self-sufficient, so separate from us. You didn't seem to need anything we could give. Marcus, he needed everything. We understood that, understood him. He coughed. We failed you both, I think. Him by giving too much, you by giving too little. Two different kinds of destruction. Why are you telling me this now? He looked at me, really looked, maybe for the first time. Because I don't have much time, and because you deserve to know it wasn't something you did, it was us, our weakness, our fear. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I needed you to know. He died 2 weeks later. I paid for the funeral. My mother didn't thank me, but she did attend. We stood at the graveside together, not speaking, not touching. Just two broken people at the end of something that had never really worked. I'm telling you all of this because someone needs to hear it. Someone out there is the family scapegoat right now. Someone is lying awake at night, wondering what's wrong with them, why they can't earn the love that everyone else seems to get for free. Someone is being told they're too sensitive, too dramatic, that the favoritism they see isn't real. It's real, and it's not your fault. I spent 20 years believing I was defective, that if I just tried harder, achieved more, bent myself into a shape my parents could love, everything would be okay. It took me another decade to learn the truth. Some battles can't be won from within. Some families can't be fixed. The only thing you can do is save yourself. Did buying that debt feel like revenge? In the moment, yes. I'd be lying if I said otherwise. There was satisfaction in watching them scramble, in seeing the tables turn so completely. But revenge is a meal that loses its flavor quickly. What I really wanted, what I didn't even know I wanted until it was happening, was to reclaim my own story. I wasn't the girl who was thrown away anymore. I was the woman who rebuilt herself from nothing, who mastered the systems that govern how money and power flow, who ended up catching the family that dropped her, not out of obligation, but because she could. Not because I'm a saint, because I'm strong enough to choose grace when I could have chosen destruction. Grandma Ruth was right. I already had everything I needed. I just had to stop looking for it in people who were never going to give it to me. I renovated the house completely, added my own touches while preserving what mattered. The library where I used to hide, the view of the garden from the kitchen window, the old wooden beam in the living room where Grandma used to measure my height every summer. I visit her grave on the anniversary of her death, bring flowers from the garden, tell her about my life, about David, who became my husband, about the business that continues to grow, about the peace I've finally found. Thank you, I say every time, for seeing me when no one else did. If you could say one thing to the family member who underestimated you, what would it be? Tell me in the comments. I'll be reading every single one.